What if the very thing you think is saving you is actually the cage? You've done the work. You've sat in silence, you've read the texts, you've learned to observe the mind's endless chatter. You've built an identity around being aware, conscious, and spiritually awake. But in those quiet moments, a whisper arises, a feeling that beneath this carefully constructed persona of peace, there's just another performance. A more refined, more virtuous mask. What if this entire spiritual identity is secretly pulling you away from the very freedom you desire? This is the most subtle trap on the path. The belief that the ultimate goal is to become a spiritual person. But the real illusion is thinking that being spiritual is the final answer. This isn't about adding another method to your toolkit. It's about the bravery to let go. It's about exploring the possibility that real awakening doesn't arrive when you finally become spiritual, but the instant you are freed from the need to be. And from this, you'll see why your own search might be the very wall keeping you from the truth. We're often taught that enlightenment is a construction project. A staircase we climb, one step at a time. We think we need to gather mystical knowledge, stack up spiritual disciplines, and collect profound experiences to someday reach the summit. How often have you found yourself adding one more practice, one more teacher, one more book to your repertoire? You seek more understanding, more silence, more rituals, hoping that there is a place you will finally arrive, finding permanent serenity. It's a perpetual quest for more, a gathering of implements and data that, paradoxically, seems to add weight to your load instead of lightening it. A moment of quiet, a moment of listening without the need to respond, a careful look at the world without the duty to interpret. These are small openings to the truth that already exists. It is not about a big promise of instant enlightenment or a life without problems. It is the promise of quiet freedom, of a peace that does not depend on circumstances, of a clarity that comes when you stop searching outside. It is the realization that the deepest awakening will not take you out of your life but into a fuller and more real experience of it, exactly as it is. So do not try to force yourself to be something. Just be present, because that is where true awakening lies. In the end, awakening is not a destination to reach. It is the deep relief of dropping the baggage, of stopping the race. It is the subtle shift from looking for peace somewhere out there to simply noticing the stillness that has always been here, under the noise of the search. This does not make you special. It makes you common, but in a freeing way. Truth shows itself in the texture of your humanity, in the full acceptance of the now with all its beauty and imperfection. If this message makes sense to you, I invite you to recognize this freedom. Comment below. I am that I am, not as a mantra, but as a calm reminder that your fulfillment is not in the future but here and now. May you rest in who you already are, without the need to seek anything else. Thank you for embarking on this journey with me. If this video resonated with you, I invite you to like this video and subscribe to the channel Winds of Thought. Share this video with others so they can benefit from this message. And don't forget to leave a comment below sharing your thoughts, reflections, and experiences. Thanks again for watching and for joining me. Take care and see you soon. It is a clear view where what is enough without needing to be changed or transcended. For a long time, spirituality served as a bridge. It offered concepts, practices, and a language to guide us beyond pure material identification. But to cross, you need brutal honesty with yourself. It is admitting without fear or shame that, I don't know. It is the courage to say, I don't have the answers. I don't control anything. And from this honesty, the permission to simply let go of everything you thought you knew. It is a kind of stepping out of the search, of the effort, of the constant struggle. It is not a failure, but an act of self-compassion. It is the reminder that you do not need to become the light because you already are the light, even if covered by many layers of concepts and conditioning. But still, you are already light. It is in the unplanned laughter of a child, in the honest tears that come without control, in the meaningless moments of daily life when you are just existing. It is in the simplicity of walking down the street, of watching the clouds. In these moments, when the ego mind is less busy telling stories or projecting itself into the future, pure presence shows itself. This is the background of all experience. So yes, there is a concrete path. It is not a path of step-by-step instructions to follow, but a path of recognition. It starts with the attitude of questioning your own beliefs, especially those about who you are and what awakening means. It involves the conscious decision to detach from the need to carry any label. It is the choice to watch without judging the movements of the ego when it tries to grab new forms of importance. And it shows up in simple routines of presence. There is no longer the chase for some future state of happiness or peace, because peace shows itself as the constant background of existence. Even in the middle of turmoil, your routine does not need to change a lot for the outer world. But your inner experience of it is different. The same daily tasks are done, but without the weight of a self trying to live a life that fits an image or expectation. When you see this, judgment and comparison disappear, because you see there is no asleep or awake, just life experiencing itself. This is where the real turning point happens. An invitation for you to look inward and recognize your part in this. The responsibility for this clarity lies completely in you, in your willingness to drop what is not real. And this is the big irony. When you stop trying to be someone, you finally find yourself. There is no need to prove your awakening to anyone, not even to yourself. This lack of need for outer or inner validation brings a gentleness and softness that are the signs of real freedom. You stop carrying the weight of a spiritual identity. The paradox of being nobody shows up as the deepest and most real form of spirituality. It is not an empty hole or a canceling of being, but the freedom from all the chains of identities that were imposed, built, or chased. It is the insight that fullness does not need a label, a story, or a title. While the spiritual ego still seeks endlessly for validation, for recognition of its enlightened status, the true self without pretensions just watches. It does not need applause, does not need followers, does not need a story. It just is, in a stillness that holds everything without resistance. This is awakening. It is the radical clarity of seeing present reality exactly as it is, without the veils and filters of beliefs, desires, or expectations. And as a result, the urge to fix the world or fix others also drops a lot, giving space to a more real acceptance of what is without the need for constant intervention. This also means a practical change in all areas of life, including work. Now you simply offer your service with full presence, sharing your knowledge without the burden or pressure of a desired outcome. Interaction becomes lighter, more real, and naturally more effective. Life starts to flow in a different way. Without the self constantly trying to control, plan, analyze, and worry. There is a natural lightness. It is not passivity or indifference, but an inner trust in life's ability to unfold without constant interference from an ego mind that believes it is in control. You may notice that before, if a daily meditation plan failed, maybe you felt guilt. Oh, I am a terrible meditator. I am not on the right path. Now there is no judgment. You simply start again when you feel like it, without attachment to performance or to the label of meditator. This is the big difference between practices done out of seeking and those that flow naturally. Before, you meditated, did yoga, or followed a specific diet to get there, to become more spiritual. Now, if you still do these things, it is out of real love for well-being or simply because it makes sense in the moment, without a final goal tied to it. The awakened do not need labels anymore. They do not need to call themselves spiritual, enlightened, or conscious. The need to belong to a group or to a specific identity fades because fullness is already present without needing outside confirmation. In conversations with friends or clients, you no longer feel pushed to use spiritualized language or to show your esoteric knowledge. You speak in a simple, direct way, sharing what is useful without the hidden intention of proving yourself as someone who knows. It is a stillness that settles in, a radical acceptance of yourself and of life as it is. It is the rediscovery of an innate presence which was never absent. It was just hidden by the endless activity of seeking what we already are. So true awakening is the deep experience of letting go, of releasing the very idea that there is something outside to be gained or a you that needs to be fixed. It is a recognition that you already are what you were seeking and that the search itself was the main barrier. This change from active search to non-action is the core ground for what comes next. When the seeker dissolves, what emerges is a stripped way of existing, a simplicity that belongs to real presence. When awakening happens, what dissolves first is identity itself, not the legal identity of our names on paper, but that complex and multi-layered story we tell ourselves about who we are. All the labels we collect through life to feel safe and defined. And together with this identity, many of the beliefs that supported it about the world, about others, about ourselves also begin to fall. Not because of an act of will, but like a house of cards that loses its key card. This is not a dramatic collapse of your personality, but a feeling of lightness, of decompression. This experience, where you are no longer defined by those built pillars, may feel like a void at first. It is as if the ground you knew disappears, leaving open an unknown space. But what shows up is not a scary emptiness, but a huge freedom disguised as open and borderless space. The need to be more spiritual than your neighbor, more evolved than your family, or more conscious than your coworkers simply dissolves. You become incredibly simple, just another person living their life with their joys and challenges. This simplicity appears in the attitude of stopping trying to fix yourself. The deep belief that there is something basically wrong with you that must be corrected fades. You start to see that the self that feels incomplete, that yearns for something more, that labors hard to reach a higher state, is itself a mental fabrication, a temporary assemblage of memories, conditioning, and projections. The end of the search appears as deep stillness and peace. It means immense relief from the weight of expectation, from the constant assessment of, am I progressing enough? It is the end of the inner drama of, I need to fix myself. This stillness that emerges is not a state gained through methods but what naturally remains when the deafening noise of the search and of the identification with the seeker finally grows quiet. The beauty of this non-action is in its simplicity. It does not demand huge effort but deep relaxation. It does not ask you to adopt a new philosophy but to drop everything that keeps you in a constant state of seeking. It is a turning point where you see with crystal clear clarity that the goal you were chasing is not somewhere far away but in the wholeness of your present experience, always available but hidden by the frantic activity of trying to get there. This insight frees you from the vicious cycle of future projection. The hope of an awakened self in the distant future falls apart, and with it, the unavoidable frustration of never reaching it. The focus of awareness realigns to the now. The only place where truth can be truly experienced. It is not about passive resignation but about radical acceptance of what is, without needing reality to be different or more spiritual. After all, when you accept what is, everything changes simply because your perspective changes. The dissolving of the identity of the self that seeks is not a tragic loss, but an expansion of consciousness. It is the freeing insight that this identity was only a self-imposed restriction. When it falls away, what remains is not emptiness, but an unnamed fullness, a pure awareness that is not tied to any label. It is a change of viewpoint that redefines the very meaning of evolution and spiritual progress. If awakening is, in fact, the end of the search, not the result of it, then the ego's project, which depends totally on the search to exist, loses its essential fuel. There is no longer a future enlightened self to be meticulously built, nor a higher state to be keenly reached. The very goal, the object of the search, simply dissipates, taking with it the false identity that supported it. It is a profound and welcome moment of surrender, not from defeat, but from a genuine and complete clarity of mind. Surrender is not a passive act of quitting, but an active and wise acknowledgement that the search itself, in its endless nature, is what obstructs the discovery of what is already here. A conscious pause in the effort that allows the innate truth, long hidden, to finally appear. This brings us to the deepest idea, the death of the self that seeks. This is not a metaphor for some theatrical event, but the slow dissolving of the identity that defines itself as the spiritual seeker. It is not a glamorous process. Many times it is a quiet release where the profound need to identify with the search and its outcome simply fades. But in a paradoxical way, it is one of the most profoundly freeing acts because it removes the crushing weight of a self-imposed identity and the constant pressure to have to become something you already are. The essential truth of what you really are, your deepest nature, comes before all your spiritual labels or your daily practices. Our essence simply is, regardless of any effort or identification we try to put on it. So, try to contemplate, who is really the one trying to awaken? If you permit yourself to look at this question with honesty, without rushing to find an intellectually satisfying answer, the very structure of the seeker's identity begins to tremble. Its form has altered, but its essence, the need for individuality, for boundaries, for a story about who I am, remains untouched and even more nuanced. And in the end, the very pursuit of freedom becomes the instrument of confinement. By pursuing enlightenment as a state to be attained, the self that seeks is fortified simply because this endless hunt for a better self prevents the acknowledgement of the perfection already present. It keeps the belief alive that there is something faulty with you now and that you require something additional to become whole, to be deserving of awakening. It is a deceptive dynamic because it operates under the cloak of virtue. Who would challenge someone seeking inner peace or enlightenment? And again, the trap is not in the aspiration itself, but in the identity that this aspiration forms and reinforces. Division, judgment, and endless seeking continue, only now with a new, more elevated and spiritualized outfit, making the exit even more difficult to spot. But awakening is the very dissolution of the ego. As long as there is a self identifying with being awake or spiritual, real wholeness will stay concealed because the seeker is still present, and with it, the search. The instant you see this dynamic, everything transforms. Because true awakening isn't about becoming something new. It's not about adding a new layer to yourself or turning into an upgraded version of who you imagine you are. It is the profound and disarming revelation that the search itself has reached its conclusion. It is not the climax of an endless voyage where you finally discover the hidden treasure of enlightenment, but the deep and liberating recognition of the exhaustion inherent in the very chase. This radical understanding alters your entire approach to life and existence, shifting the focus from endless collecting of experiences, knowledge, or states of being to a quiet and total deconstruction of all needs to seek and to become. What if the search itself is the problem? But this new identity is more elusive and more perilous than it appears because the ego is incredibly cunning. It is a master of adjustment. The mechanism is quite clever. The peace that the spiritual ego often displays is actually a phantom sensation. It is not the unconditional stillness that comes from the absence of identity, but the gratification that comes from feeling above the turmoil, more advanced, more enlightened than the masses. It is a peace that relies on the existence of an other, who is less peaceful to define itself, a calm that shatters at the first challenge to its spiritual platform. It is a fragile quiet built on the unstable foundation of comparison. It must be continually bolstered by the perception that others are adrift or in disorder so that the peaceful self can feel secure in its elevated place. But real peace, authentic inner peace, needs no contrast to be. It simply is. And it contains both the tempest and the calm. At this stage, hidden criticisms begin to flower. The ego watches the world and the people around it through a warped lens of comparison. It notes my peace versus the chaos of others, my insight versus the unawareness of others, my non-attachment in the face of worldly desires. It may even mask judgment as empathy, feeling sorrow for those who haven't yet awakened, which is just another method of placing itself on a higher tier. The mechanism behind this is straightforward but deeply embedded. The ego, by its very nature, is a structure of division. It needs to set itself apart to define itself in contrast to something or someone to exist. Being spiritual or awake becomes a new seal of approval, a new method to be better than or different from, and therefore separate. It adopts the language of enlightenment, the symbols of wisdom, and the postures of a teacher, all to continue existing and extending itself. I see reality clearly. And often, this is the voice of the ego, now in a new uniform, subtly hunting for validation and separation. This new self-image is hazardous because it provides a false sense of advancement. We think we are on the correct path, evolving, while in fact we are only strengthening the same mechanism of self-identification, just with new content. The ego masquerading as the spiritual seeker keeps us trapped in a loop where the search becomes the identity itself. And when the search becomes your identity, you are doomed to never find, because the seeker requires the search to exist. This snare makes us believe that awakening is an achievement to be unlocked, a kind of spiritual prize. It drives us to collect credentials. I've meditated for a decade. I've done silent retreats. I've studied all the ancient paths. If you've done these things, that's not without value. But if the core drive is to build a superior spiritual self, then we are only swapping one cell for another, perhaps a gilded one with a better view, but a cell nonetheless. The most golden cage is still a cage. The query we seldom pose is, who is it that is seeking this awakening? And what is the real drive behind this search? Is it an authentic thirst for truth, or the pursuit of a new way to be somebody, to feel unique, to fill an emptiness? When we gaze at this with honesty, we see that the problem isn't spirituality itself, but our relationship to it. It can be a road to liberation, but it can also be the most elegant of prisons if the ego commandeers it. So, grasping this dynamic is the first move to exiting the vicious cycle of the search. It is seeing that no matter how honest our longing for awakening is, the ego has a phenomenal talent for converting even the purest intention into a personal mission. It persuades us that we need to be something, when in fact we need to cease being what we are not. We need to peel the layers off, not put new ones on. Awakening is a moment of recognition, not of invention. You do not need to turn into anything you aren't already. The notion that we must become something is a potent snare because it often markets the promise of a better, loftier, more worthy self, if only we adhere to this or that system or collect this or that virtue. And this mindset of becoming can sustain an infinite quest, a horizon that is never attained. Because the self that is searching is always casting its fulfillment into a perfect future, never into the here and now where truth actually resides. But what awakening shows is already present. It is in the simplicity of your breath, in the quiet between thoughts, in the pure awareness that witnesses your own experience. Consciousness doesn't require elaborate ceremonies or arcane wisdom to exist. Your task, if we can name it, is only to clear the static, the lenses, and the expectations that prevent it from being seen. It is like wiping a dirty mirror so you can see what has always been reflected back at you with total sharpness and no distortion. And it is here that the initial trap appears, perhaps the most deceptive of all, the ego. Yes, the ego, the one you may believe you are transcending or dissolving, is remarkably adept at co-opting your quest for awakening. The ego has no wish to vanish. It wants to persist. And for that, it is a genius at reshaping itself. If before it was defined by your job, your social standing, or your possessions, now it finds a new costume, more noble, more elevated, the spiritual identity. Suddenly, the ego is no longer pursuing external approval for your riches, but for your enlightenment. It latches onto ideas like inner calm, higher awareness, or non-attachment and makes them into new objects of craving and self-confirmation. You might hear yourself thinking, I am a spiritual person. I am more aware than others. Imagine your true self as a brilliant diamond, but covered in layers of dust and grime. To make it shine, you don't need to add more light to the diamond. You only need to wipe away the dirt. This is an inner cleansing, not a new erection. The labor is not architecture, but excavation. You are not constructing a new shrine, but uncovering one that was always there, buried under the wreckage of your own ideas and labels. But what is it we clear away in this inner purification? We don't discard the practices themselves, but the clinging to them as a way to a destination. We don't throw out the knowledge, but the persona we construct from it as a badge of advancement or superiority. We clear out constricting beliefs, the anticipations of how we ought to be, and the narratives we repeat about who we are and who we must become. Letting go is an act of unveiling. You start to release the necessity to have a viewpoint on everything, the need to be correct, the need to manage results. You release the tales of victimhood, the stories of heroism, the sagas of the seeker. Each layer that drops away uncovers a simplicity and a tranquility that do not rely on any external or internal situation to be. It is a fundamental unveiling, a conscious unbuilding. We are speaking of dropping the identities we wear, the masks we use, the parts we play, not just in society but, most critically, on our own spiritual journey. But I want to tell you that you don't need to strive to be the meditator, the awakened one, the seeker, because you are already everything. The only problem is that perhaps everything you have done until now has been adding curtains over this inherent fact. Is the person seeking enlightenment just a thought, a story? This is the initial and most fundamental mirage that holds us captive. Waking up has nothing to do with accumulation. It's not about growing wiser, cleaner, or more illuminated. It is a fundamental process of letting go. It is the persistent, and sometimes uncomfortable, shedding of all that is not genuine, of every layer of programming and every fabricated self-concept that obscures what is already here, whole and perfect, in the core of this moment. Awakening is not an addition, but a subtraction. The mindset of the physical world, where amassing assets, information, and standing equals success, is incorrectly imported into the inner realm. The mind, conditioned to fix issues by obtaining more, uses the same tactic on its own existential unease. If I feel a void, the answer must be to stuff that void with more spirituality. Many of us, with sincere hearts, yearn for profound change. We want to feel we are improving, turning into better humans, more aware. And for that, we dive into anything that pledges to elevate us to this next spiritual tier. But despite all this devotion and work, a sense of lack or irritation remains. And in these moments, a question emerges: why, when I'm doing everything correctly, does it feel like something fundamental is still absent? This question, this prick of letdown, is the initial clue that the guide we're using might be flawed. Frustration isn't necessarily a mark of defeat, but a summons to challenge the very foundation of the quest. The endurance of dissatisfaction, even within a life rich with spiritual routines, indicates a core error in the method. The issue isn't your commitment, but the heading in which it's aimed. Because, once more, genuine awakening isn't about gathering. It's not about holding more. In its essence, it is a process of removal. A deliberate and courageous clearing away of everything that is not you. Of all that is muddying your fundamental nature.